Hi, Sully. It is so good to have you here. If you mind giving us a quick little introduction about you and, uh, if you're bold enough, how we met?
Oh, yes, for sure. Thank you, Mr. Packard, for having me on the channel. So my name is Matthew. I sometimes go by Sully, as many people call me. A little bit about myself. Born and raised in northern Mississippi, um, around the Memphis area. So interesting time. I spent 18 years there. Went on down to Baylor University in the good old Waco, Texas, for 5 years.
Sick 'em, by the
To
way.
work Sick 'em Bears. And while at Baylor, I got my master's in accountancy and bachelor's in business administration, and joined for 2 years Air Force ROTC, which is how I met Mr. Packard here. It was a grand old time. And then now I currently live up in Colorado, right outside of Denver. Been living here for just over a year now. And so I typically work in accounting and more specifically internal audit. So it's always a good time.
Yeah, and I've got to say, like, for those who may or may not know Sully, like, Sully, you are absolutely one of my dearest friends. And when I was trying to think
Likewise,
of,
Mr. Packard.
I'm flattered, by the way. One of the things that really sticks to me is wise counsel. I feel like if anything happens anywhere, like we'll usually text each other about it, but you're like the first person I think of texting and getting your view and your opinion on something because I
Oh, well,
value
Mr.
it
Packard,
so much.
I would argue it's not really my view and opinion. And I guess this would be a little segue into the first conversation. But I tell you, you get this wisdom and this ability to, this counsel, as you mentioned. I am a voracious reader, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And through reading hundreds, if not over 1,000 books, you learn about how others encounter certain situations in life. Even if you could say, even if it's a fantasy book, it doesn't matter. There's situations that these characters in these books encounter, that it's situations that we would have never encountered so far in our lives. But we learn, and we had this ability to learn from these characters how they interact with situations, good or bad, because you can learn from a failure and you can learn from a success, just as that's same for both. And so the superpower there is the more you read and delve into literature and even just the arts in general, you really learn how to encounter society in multiple different ways. And you can see different situations from different facets, right?
Mm-hmm. No,
And so I,
I like that
I could go on a
perspective.
long tangent there, but yes, you mentioned I'm very happy that you do appreciate my counsel, but I must defer much of that honor to the grand authors that I have read across many genres and books and all throughout my life.
Well, I'm glad that you've read all of that, and to be able to be
There you
that
go.
informed. How about that? Is that a better way of putting it?
That's a grand way of putting it.
Yes. So and we were chatting a bit just before the interview, but you were talking about books, so I feel like this is a great segue. Um, any book recommendations? Anything you've read recently that's kind of just stuck out to you?
Oh yes, yes, actually a couple. So. Um, I think before this call we were talking about it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
About a month ago, I finished The Brothers Karamazov, Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely amazing, and I would argue that one of the characters, Alyosha Karamazov, is probably one of my favorite literary characters of all time. So
Really?
in my ranking, I put like Aragorn and Faramir from The Lord of the Rings. I'll put Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, and I'll put Athos from The Three Musketeers. Not D'Artagnan. I love Athos though. But now, who's joined those ranks is Alyosha Karamazov. Absolutely amazing. And going back to that council, he encounters so many situations that just push his morals, his ethics, and what is convenient for him. Like we there's a grand quote, was virtue convenient at the time? And it pushes, Alyosha is pushed to these situations where he must make these choices. And so seeing how he interacted with the people around him, the world around him, was absolutely fascinating. And I would encourage any reader out there, pick up Brothers Karamazov, and I plan on reading it several more times in my life. It's one of those books you'll have to revisit multiple times, as I know I didn't get everything I could have the first time around.
Yeah, I'm actually like if my jaw could hit the floor, it would for two reasons. One, you've convinced me to read a book that I probably wasn't gonna read otherwise. And two, like I know how high regard you keep some of those other characters from like Lord of the Rings or TCAM, right? So
Oh yeah.
it's really I think your recommendation of how much you liked Alyosha is that's telling. That's really really cool. So
It was amazing. I'll leave it there. But I will warn you though, and to anyone who is considering picking up Brothers Karamazov, that is, unless you are already a well seasoned reader and a pretty just as a generalization, a good reader, I would recommend working on reading skills to where you could say I'm a good reader,
mhm.
because it is a very heavy book. It is a theological, philosophical, psychological, all wrapped into what they say is a murder mystery, but that's the the side effects. It's the entire yeah 18th excuse me 19th century Russian society. So it's all of these things wrapped up in this book. So it's very very heavy. It's a very heavy book that even took me quite some time to get through, and I would argue I'm a pretty quick reader.
I I not that anyone can see it right now, but I think your library at home speaks for itself. If for those who might not know, it's what is it like it's like a whole wall next to
It
your
is.
kitchen.
It is. It's about 600 plus books. So, and I very rarely keep multiple copies of the same book, with the exception of Lord of the Rings, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I over the years I've just collected, and to go back a little bit of like how that started, it was maybe a good idea. Within Baylor University, there was a semi honors program called the Baylor Interdisciplinary Corps, and
Vic.
within that program, yes, the BIC, of course. And so within that program, it was first off extremely reading heavy, i.e., we read the Iliad in 3 days, the Odyssey in 3 days, and so it was a very, very demanding program for my reading abilities. So anyway, having needing to read all these books, I'm not a big fan of renting certain books, especially like classics that I knew I was going to read. So I just bought them, and luckily I bought them for pretty cheap. And so that
Mm-hmm.
started this collection that started building up my library. And so with the BIC, they would go from, I kid you not, from the oldest book that we have, I guess, a written record of, which is Epic Gilgamesh, which is actually incomplete, but still a great book. I can go on so many tangents with Epic of Gilgamesh, all the way up until modern books in 20th, 21st century, which it was, when you take that span of time, one, there's just an insurmountable amount of works that were written between those that since the beginning of literature. And
Mm-hmm.
so in the BIC we read, I don't even know how many books we read. Having purchasing those books one after another, you acquire quite the collection. And then I got too lazy to stop, you could say.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the Epic of Gilgamesh because that's something that's been on my mind, and the Iliad for that matter as
Really?
well. I've read the Epic of Gilgamesh. I had to do that way back in high school, and then I've never read the Iliad. So actually, I just through like an online library that I'm a part of. I just got the Iliad, so that's something I'll be reading here soon. But my favorite part of the Epic of Gilgamesh is the intro.
Hmm.
Which
Oh
there's
yes.
so much that's so good about the Epic of Gilgamesh, just because like I feel it's so cool to be able to connect to people from that long ago. But the Epic of Gilgamesh starts off, and it's like in those ancient days, which to me is mind blowing because we think of them
I mean,
as ancient, right? Like, yeah.
exactly.
So
It's wild to think that even for them, they are still harkening back, and that tells you how much we probably don't know, how many stories that we don't have. So the Epic of Gilgamesh was written in about 20. I mean, it's disputed between 2100 and 1200 BC, and so it's such an interesting thing to think that in 21. Let's be conservative. Even let's just say 1200 BC,
mhm.
they're still considering a time that was ancient prior to that.
Yeah, that is
It's
mind
wild.
blowing. I think it's like in those ancient days, those very, very ancient days when bread was first fired in the oven, right? Like, like
Right.
I think there's like a humanity string that's tugged on there whenever whenever I read that in particular. So what a cool story. And I'm excited to read the Iliad too. For the record, just because
Very
I
good,
mentioned it,
very good.
I
And if
feel
you
like I've
read
done
the
myself a disservice. I don't know if I can read it in 3 days like you did, but
Oh no, no, no! No, enjoy it.
nice.
And remember, if you read the Iliad, I would strongly recommend you read the Odyssey shortly after because they do connect very closely to each
Mm-hmm.
other.
Mm-hmm. So that's awesome. So with all of the reading you've been doing, have you? And this doesn't just have to be reading wise, but have you
Oh yeah.
learned anything new recently?
Ooh, the question with that's a loaded question. It's a matter of where to start.
Yeah, fair,
Um,
fair.
I'll take it back to another book that I read as well. This was only just a couple of weeks ago. I started C.S. Lewis's space trilogy. So that's Out of the Silent Planet, Pyrlandra, and That Hideous Strength. I've read the first two, and I'm pausing. October, I'm reading Dracula, and then I'll pick up the last of the trilogy soon. But anyway, to give you a little bit of a synopsis, in Out of the Silent Planet, it's about this man who is forcibly taken to Mars, and he encounters the inhabitants of Mars. Now, this is Lewis writing in 19, I believe, the 40s, maybe 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So, needless to say, there's a lot of speculation on what's on Mars at the time.
Yeah, maybe just a little.
Yeah, just a little. So,
Yeah.
and then in the second book, he is sent to Venus. So anyway, uh, it was really interesting seeing this perspective. So when the character Dr. Elwin Ransom is on Mars, the god of Mars, so to speak, tells, or God and also a few other characters he meets, the alien species, they tell him that Earth is considered the silent planet. Uh, uh, what is it? Delundra. I get the name, maybe get the name wrong, but Thulkandra, I believe. And so it's this perspective of looking at Earth, and the reason they call Earth the silent planet is the basis is there's multiple gods, and there's a singular god, but then there's incarnates of the gods on these other worlds, and then the incarnate of God on Earth fell, was twisted, very, very biblical, and that Earth itself is now the silent planet. It's besieged by the good forces, but it's mainly evil that's taken hold in the Earth. And it's really interesting looking at it from that point of view of and I'll get on this in a little tangent, is that thinking about how we as human beings, how would we religiously deal with the fact that there is, if we discover life on other planets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And 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 this trilogy has really been making me think about that. And for the viewers out there who don't know, I'm a good old Catholic boy.
Very
I
good
joined
Catholic
Catholic,
boy.
joined the Catholic Church in 2019, so I'm not a cradle Catholic. I came into the church, but anyway, so taking that point, my own point of view and my own concept of God and my own relationship with God, challenging that with how would I reconcile life on other planets? How would I reconcile that to my faith? And so, Out of the Silent Planet has definitely sparked that thought in me. Now, the way Lewis tackles the issue is and I won't go on and on. This will be a whole nother podcast. Um,
Yeah, I feel like a
but
lot of these
how?
issues. Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, but how he encounters it and how he describes it, and then also how he tackles that issue is quite fascinating. So, what did I learn? Is I'm learning more about how I would come. So it's problems that I haven't encountered before that I'm also learning to think about and think more. So that's one little tangent. Of course, I now I have to add something about the Brothers Karamazov.
Uh-oh. I might have lost you.
Full of
Oh,
oh, did you
you
still
still
here?
there? Yep, yep, yeah, I can hear you now.
All right, beautiful. All right, I'll go back to Brothers Karamazov. I feel like I have to speak at least a little bit on that book. A few things I learned there. One, be very careful about who you. I mean, it goes back to a biblical principle. Watch who you make company with and who you surround yourself with. Another thing I learned from Brothers Karamazov is just the encounters that Alyosha has with other characters, in that he learns not to pass judgment on certain characters he meets, and he exhibits this most unconditional love for even the most evil of beings and the most wretched of beings. And that's one reason I love the character of Alyosha so much, is I believe that all of us as mankind can learn from that, now, no matter how quote unquote wretched someone might be, there is a place for love there, and that we are obligated to love our fellow man. And why you can already hear me. This could easily move into the political
Oh, yo,
situation of the
yeah,
modern
oh, I
world.
know, yeah.
But I,
We are on a knife's edge with that subject.
oh, yeah, I promise it was not intentional.
No worries. No, but something I really value that you said is how Alyosha had to learn to not pass judgment. I feel like it's so
He
easy,
did.
and I think we all learn it just as a course of growing up to kind of judge people one way or another. And it's
Well, it's a defense mechanism.
yeah, of course.
It's how we encounter before we encounter a situation, right? Before we encounter a person, a place, or a thing. Our natural reaction is to make a quick judgment because if you meet someone, you want to judge them on, is this good or bad, is this person going to help or hinder me, and that's just a natural thing as human beings. When we encounter a situation, is this going to be a good situation or is this going to put me in danger? So judgment is hardwired into us, to our deepest core. But uh, we must be careful, and this is where the learning takes place, is not only that must we learn, not to judge, but to be very careful about how our judgments are curated and where our judgments are coming from. Because if our judgments are coming from a place of ignorance or a place of unwarranted fear, ignorant fear, then we need to be aware of that. But if our judgments, I mean, for example, if you see a red hot coal, you're passing a judgment of you're not going to touch it. That's common sense, because we've all been burnt one time in our life. But when we meet people, is where it gets very interesting. And I'm guilty of this. I've definitely seen some people, and I'm just to quote Hercule Poirot from The Murder on the Orient Express. I don't like your face. And that's all there is to it. Now, for
Yeah.
Poirot, it worked out pretty well. He wasn't defending a murderer. But in many cases in life, that we have to reel that in and really learn somebody. So in Poirot's defense, he knew that this man was a wretched human being. So he had a lot more information than we usually do when we meet a stranger. Let's just put it that way.
Well, he should have
Um,
learned to love him. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, well, by the time he
to
could
an
have loved him,
extent.
it was
Yeah, to an extent.
everyone on the, I don't want to spoil the book, but he dies.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
you
and
do
for the
hate to see
betterment.
that.
Yeah, you really hate to see a murderer die.
Yeah, drat. Yeah, so
Oh.
oh, that's good.
But anyway, I just didn't want to steal your thunder there, but just wanted to
No,
point it.
no. That's that. Hey, that's why I do stuff like this. Again, you're one of the reasons I value your perspective is so much is because you're able. I mean, obviously you're incredibly well read, and it's really cool hearing you make connections like that to all these different books and all these different things that you've experienced. One thing that I think is crazy, if I had a book recommendation, it'd be Dracula. So kind of funny that that you're reading that right now.
I'm
You're
loving it
about
too.
Yeah, I say so I had to read that when I was in high school, and when I was in high school, I just spark noted it. I was like some random 1800s classic, like I don't care, like I'm not gonna do it. So my fraternity, SAE, Phi Alpha, to anyone listening or not, we have a little book club. Some of us alumni, and via a course of that book club, we read Dracula last month, and I'll be honest, I was shocked with how relatable it was. And it's so cool. Like one thing I really appreciated about Dracula is that it kind of breaks the mold in a couple ways, like from a historical perspective, because like writing in the journalistic style was new. Like that wasn't a thing. Kind of like a stream of consciousness type of writing, that was new. And then
and non-chronological.
and not chronological. That's a very good point. And not to mention the fact that vampires were new. I remember being young and zombies were all the rage. It's just fun to hear, like because being the modern reader, right? We have Dracula to reference with anything vampire related, but the people who were reading it for the first time had no Dracula to reference it to. So it's cool to hear them talk about things that seem obvious to us. They're like, oh, the white fangs, that's kind of weird. But to us, we're like, yeah, it's a vampire.
Well, and also, what's fascinating is when Jonathan Harker sees the white fangs, he says it's odd, but he doesn't instantly say, "Oh my God, I need to run. This is a vampire," as we would in the modern world,
exactly, Yeah, and I just find that interplay, like we're in such a unique time to read that, because in one regard, I think the English is still pretty relatable too. And I know in a couple generations it might not be that way with like Skibbity Riz or whatever. But it is nice that we live in a perfect time period to kind of have the best of both worlds.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're liking that. I loved that book. Actually, I listened to most of it. I read a very good portion of it, but the other portion it was on audiobook because I drive to work, which I'd never really tried an audiobook before. But I think the person did well enough.
Nice.
It was a British guy, right? So it can't be that bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope
Oh,
you enjoy.
oh yeah. No, from what I've gathered from it so far, I think I'm about a quarter of the way through. It also another thing to your point about this being the first Dracula. It's amazing how much our cinema and our own modern literary works has corrupted the original idea of Dracula. It's and this is what's thrown me for a loop is because I've seen plenty of Dracula movies and you hear the Dracula stories and the myths, but now reading the actual authentic OG, to use the modern parlance, the OG Dracula it's very interesting because it's kind of blowing out of the water these preconceived notions I had about what Dracula would be.
Yeah.
But it's great though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think like the first thing I was like, well, that's weird, is when it talked about Dracula having
Yeah.
like a white beard, like like a mustache and beard. I was like, no, no, no. He's like clean shaven. He's got like the slick back, like black hair, But like maybe that's not the case.
Maybe not.
Just in a word. So yeah, it's really cool to see how it challenges my idea of Dracula. So I believe in a Dracula that's slightly different than what the original was. To your point.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I think that's. Anyways, I loved it, and just like I loved like Sherlock Holmes, it was surprisingly
Great
relatable.
books.
Oh
Oh yeah.
oh my gosh, I can't speak highly enough about those books. I think they at least helped me to like think a little bit more, like do a little bit more critical thinking in my life. Like I think it's just so funny when like Sherlock Holmes does like an act of deduction, and Watson's like, "How did you do that?" And he's like, "Well, actually, it was pretty easy, you idiot." And then like
Yeah, he
explains
makes
it
a
to him.
logical leap. That's what that is. It's not a deduction. It's a logical
A
leap.
couple logical, a lot of logical leaps, but it is funny just to just to start get the wheels spinning a little bit. But
Well,
I love
along
it.
that tangent about things that have been making me think that are very relatable and applicable to modern times. So, have you read Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet?
Oh man, I was in ninth grade when I read Hamlet, so I don't remember much
All
about
right,
it.
so I read the tragedy of Prince Hamlet of Denmark in I think it was 11th or 12th grade of high school. But something I did the last weekend was I got to see a production in Denver of Shakespeare's Hamlet. Now, I always say the books are, if there's originally written as a book, it's always better than the movie. There's one place I break that. If it's originally written as a play, I believe it's better to be seen and experienced in its play form than reading it, say, out of a book, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like Shakespeare's plays, they were never meant to be read because also when he wrote them, most people were illiterate and couldn't read them. They were meant to be seen. So that's why when I saw Hamlet was showing, they were going to show Hamlet here in Denver, I just had to do it because once again, I want to see this most amazing, I would consider it one of his greatest works, presented on how it was originally meant. And I will say, Hamlet is even more applicable now in the modern world than it has ever been. Quite
Interesting.
an amazing story. And it is a tragedy, but it also comes down to the idea of judgment, of how you're treating others. There's specifically one scene that kind of cracks me up. And so Hamlet is about to kill or he's walking to see his mother, and he sees his uncle outside kneeling, right? Now, this is the same uncle that Hamlet has learned has killed his father and married his mother, so he just despises his uncle. Well, his uncle is sitting in the courtyard praying, and Hamlet goes through this monologue, and I'll paraphrase a little bit. He is ready to strike down his uncle, but then he says, wait a minute. If I kill him now, he's sure to go to heaven. I can't do that. No, 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 no. He said, I'm going to wait until I can make sure that he goes down to hell.
That's so.
And I was like, that's quite fascinating. Just how, I mean, this is written, what, 1500s? Is that right? Maybe it's even older. Maybe older.
Yeah,
But anyway,
yeah. somewhere around
15 or
there.
16. I think 15 or 1600s. But it's like wild. This man is so spiteful. He sees the person he wants to kill, but he's like, nah, he's praying. I can't kill him now. I gotta wait.
Yeah. Wait, take 5, team. It's so funny. Yeah,
But anyway, yeah. So
that's good.
if you haven't been to a play, go see a Shakespeare play. It's completely worth it. 100% worth any money you spend on it. Um, very, very informative.
Yeah, I think plays are just cool. I had the opportunity last winter, actually up in Denver as well, to go with Sarah, my wife, for everyone listening. Hey guys, we went to like an improv play show, and like going there, I was like, oh my gosh, it's just a play. But no, it was really cool. Like I'm glad I went. It was a really good time. I think there's something about the in-person arts that's somewhat lost.
I agree. No, I was about to make that comment. I feel like in the modern world, the support and the patronage for the arts, and I mean arts, I mean like classical arts. So a concert, like a concert, but in the original meaning of a concert, not as in you would think of a modern concert, but an actual concert, which I guess we would say an orchestra now. Plays, musicals. I mean, yes, they're still extremely popular, but I just don't see the fervor in people to experience them and to work towards being able to see them. It's a bit saddening for me. I also see this in the fact of and just how books have been evolving over the years as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
But I'll stop there before I go too far.
Yeah, and just one point on that. I think our generation was kind of one of the first, if not the first, to really go through some of those changes, particularly with books. I think because I imagine someone even 10 years before me probably had to read the dang book and not just SparkNote it, right?
Yeah.
So, and I wish.
I mean, imagine before the internet, so before 2000, if you had to do a research paper, you had to go to a library.
I know.
And you had to go through the note cards, or what are they called? Oh my goodness, I can't think of the word. But you remember
the actual bibliography, like the note cards.
The note cards where to find where the book is located. I wish I could think of the term, what it's called. But yeah, no, imagine like when we were in Baylor, right? For example, whenever we had to research a project, we could just go online, find some academic journals, whatever.
Yeah, and the Baylor online library, right? Like
exactly. I don't know if I ever went into Moody Library for a research paper. Now that I think about it.
That's interesting. I know I went to Moody, the library at Baylor, for research.
Oh, to study all the time. I went to study all the time.
I wasn't there to like go, what
find
book
a
should
book.
I grab, right? Yeah, no, I was just there to like do the research in the library. And looking back, I should have just asked for some help, because I'm sure they would have made some very long nights a lot shorter, to say the least.
Card catalog is the word I was trying to think of about the library.
I remember I have a childhood memory from, I think I was in like, gosh, I would have had to been in like first, second, or third grade, somewhere thereabouts. And we had a research paper, and we needed like 10 sources. And so we had to make a card catalog for our paper.
Ooh.
And keep it in a little like card catalog. I don't even know how it's a small box for if anyone's young enough to not remember those. And I remember crying as I did it because I hated it so much. And I've always had poor handwriting. And so it was a mix of like, my, like, I knew my handwriting was bad. I knew the teacher would get me some points off for that. And I didn't want to do the dang bibliography in like MLA 5 or whatever, whatever we were using back then. But card catalog, I haven't thought of that in forever, Sully. So thanks for bubbling that one back up to this.
Yes. I love bringing old trauma back to people's minds. It's a talent.
Yeah. Oh man. So on that line of books, of reading, of all this knowledge, has a perspective of yours changed recently? I'll give an example to kind of talk about, I guess, to frame this question. So I've always liked flags. You know that about me. And I've always liked flags.
Vexologist.
Yes. As a fellow flag enjoyer. In fact, now that I live out here in Ohio, I bought a nice Ohio flag. I got to fly the swallowtail.
Very unique flag too.
Very unique flag. It's it's. I love the flag. I really, really love this state, and I actually have a Buckeye, like the actual like seed here, like I'm holding it in my hand right now.
Nice.
Anyway, so hey, it's not so bad. But one of the things that I held pretty dearly for a while in terms of one of my a perspective I didn't even know I held dearly about flags was the kind of like the trend of like modernizing flags. Your home state of Mississippi recently updated its flag a couple years ago. I think most recently, I want to say it was like
Minnesota.
Utah, Minnesota as well. They've updated their flags, and so I've always been a fan of like, okay, if it's a flag that has a blue background and a seal on it, it should change. And my
I agree.
perspective on that changed. I don't believe that anymore.
Really?
Which is incredible to me, because if I would have asked myself a year ago, like, should you change the seal on a blue background, I would have said absolutely. And that changed recently. I watched a pretty compelling argument from a YouTube channel called Pre-Modernist, and he was talking about why those flags are the way they are, and then are they actually as hard to distinguish as one another? And kind of his answer is they're actually fairly easy to distinguish. You just have to like actually put some effort into it, just like you would for any other flag. Like all the Scandinavian countries have essentially the same flag with a couple different colors, and any of us flag nerds had to like take time to memorize and learn like, okay, if it's
Unless you
red,
play Hoi 4 enough.
unless you play Hoi 4 or EU4, whatever Paradox game.
Oh, yeah.
But you had to take time to memorize that. In the
Right.
same way, you could do the same thing for all the blue background seal flags. But also, they have a really interesting connection, most of them at least, to the American Civil War, which is something I'd never considered. As I've recently been getting really interested in the Civil War, I didn't realize that the flags, a lot of them, the northern states, flags weren't really a thing for states until the Civil War because they needed a banner to fight under. And so a whole bunch of the northern states essentially took a Union blue because they're part of the Union and then put their seal on it and went to battle with those flags, which is just something I find incredible. And I can't believe I didn't know that about
I
those
did not know
flags.
that either. Thank you for the enlightening.
Yeah,
That's
it was
really
enlightening
interesting.
to me. So I was like, okay, so there's actually history there. Like, it's not just they were lazy. It's that they needed something to fight with yesterday. So we're going to put this together and we're going to go blast some Confederates with it. So really, really interesting to me. I was like, okay, maybe we don't have to change them, right? Like, maybe they could stay. So there's an example of one of my, this was like not even a month ago when I came to that realization. So I'll point the cannon at you, so to speak. Have any perspectives of yours, and it doesn't have to be within the last month, but I say recently in the past quarter and a half, 2 quarters, any of your perspectives changed?
Ooh, that is a good question. Okay, here's one of my perspectives, and this is going to be kind of a boring perspective, I guess. But I used to have the perspective of I was very career focused, and I still am to an extent. But my perspective on just how much time as Americans we put into our jobs and how American culture is essentially workaholic in many of its ways. And this perspective changed so for those of you who don't know, I'm a German American, so my mother's an immigrant. So I was speaking to some family in Germany, and I realized they have mandated 4 weeks of paid vacation. And I was like, wait, what? And then I asked, well, what about your, work week? Well, it's a 38-hour work week, and your days you get an hour paid lunch normally. I was like, wait a minute. And so then that got me thinking. You remember how the old saying used to be work the 9 to 5?
Mm-hmm.
Well, now it's changed to the 8 to 5, an hour unpaid lunch. Used to, it'd be 9 to 5, and most of the times you'd have a paid lunch. And so it's just very interesting to see how American work culture has shifted away from being, in my opinion, more life-friendly, where people realize that you worked, but you still had a life, where work has kind of invaded and taken over many, become life. And so being at Baylor and going through the business school and getting my master's in accountancy, I definitely fell into that trap of work sort of became my life. And I think I spoke to you on this. I remember working, because I worked in a Big Four accounting firm, I worked 60, 70 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
And you just did it to achieve your goals.
Hit the
And then I
numbers,
realized,
right?
yeah, hit the numbers, and yeah, you're making money, woohoo. But then I realized that, wait a minute, and it's definitely been a couple of things that have triggered this. But I'm starting, especially now that I've switched jobs and I'm working 40, 45 a week, I'm starting to realize more and more how little important actually work should be, and how it shouldn't be, the main part of our lives. It's just very it's been a perspective shift on mine of I'm definitely shifting away from that corporate work mindset and putting more and more value in my own personal life, and that could be anything from, even if it's just wasting time. I love the saying, time you enjoy wasting is not wasted time, but that's sometimes just better than sitting at a corporate job to make an extra $100. But that $100, you'll never be able to buy your time back. And now I'm about to be 25 this year, next year, and I'm starting to realize, wait a minute, I don't want to look back and say, wow, I just spent my entire life working. So that's been my big perspective shift. It's just also hearing it from family in Europe. They travel, they vacation. I'm hearing about what they do and the hobbies. And I thought to myself, how do you have time for this? But you actually also seem really happy, even though I'm making more money than them. I'm definitely not as happy in that sense. And so, yeah, that was a a big perspective shift on my end. I'm definitely moving away from that American idea of, hey, you need to work. And I think actually a lot of our generation is too.
Mm.
So I don't think it's just me. I think this is definitely a generational shift as well.
And I think I guess 2 points. You're in a pretty unique position where since you are German and you are American, you have maybe a bit easier access to get outside the American bubble. And I feel like that's hard
Yes.
for a lot of Americans to do, and at times, myself included. I try to be a man of the world, but I also am an American, right? So sometimes I
Right.
get trapped with my Americanisms and my point of view. But I think it's refreshing to hear you say that, and that not only do you have that interaction with your family over in the Vaterland, but also that, like, hey, you know what? Maybe they know a thing or two, which reminds me of a saying. I learned it all the way back in high school Mandarin. And the saying is, and I'm sorry, I'm going to speak a little Chinese on you here.
Oh, please do.
Sorry, 一寸光阴,一寸金,寸金难买,寸光阴, which essentially translates to, if you have an inch of gold and you have an inch of time, then the inch of gold can never buy the inch of time. And you mentioned something just like that, which made me think of that. Like, you can't buy your time back. It's the really the only, like, truly finite resource we have, and it's
Oh, yeah.
undoubtedly the most precious resource we have.
And no matter how rich or poor you are, you have 24 hours a day. No one can take that away from you.
No, no.
But I find this completely ironic and rather hilarious that saying, Chinese, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I think China has probably the most toxic work environment in the history of the world
Oh,
with
I
their
mean, yeah,
996. Oh, jeez.
yeah. If not the most toxic, it certainly is in the top couple, right? There's not
But
much
hey,
worse.
you got to crank it out for American consumerism, am I right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think in China, just some things. I don't want to defend China here. Some things are changing from the sweatshop days of, like, our youth, but regardless, the fact that that happened and continues to happen in China is not great to live up to that. They call it chengyu, but the idiom that I just dropped on the team here. So no, yeah,
But
absolutely.
it's interesting because, and I do want to make this point, but I think it is important. And that is, it's very easy for us to sit here and say, oh, the Chinese, they have this horrible work environment. But we need to stop and realize, and I kind of made this joke just a couple of seconds ago, but a lot of our own country culture, like our own consumeristic nature, drives most of that. And I would argue that it's not completely, the Chinese government's fault. I mean, they're just also trying to meet supply and demand, right?
Sure.
And if we as a culture here, we've talked about this extensively before, about many people would rather pay. Everyone wants something cheaper. Yes, that's common. We all want things cheaper. However, we must think about the cost that's coming at, in that, us getting, say, a package from Amazon that we had shipped in 2 days and that was super cheap, rather than something made in the States so that we could buy at our local mom and pop store. But we don't realize that us purchasing that has created one more demand, which the Chinese, the people in China working in factories, they have to fill. So that's another worker,
Mm-hmm.
and we think about those effects, those waterfall effects of our own nature. That's another shift that I've definitely been growing the past specifically 3 years now, is just seeing how our own choices, though across the world, still has effects on society that we think we would have no connection to. And this goes into even the most basic, and I'll get a little philosophical and a little theological here,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the big Catholic argument that when you do evil, right? One reason it's so bad is when you commit evil, you're not just harming yourself. Like, evil is not victimless. Evil affects everyone around you. I on my own end, I've seen this with living with an alcoholic, for example. It's not just the person, the alcoholic. Yes, he passed away, but that affected an entire family. So that one evil, which you would think is a personal challenge, still affected everyone around him. And the same thing with our own nature, whether it's what we buy, what we see, what we do, what we say, no matter what, everything we do. And I encourage like everyone, and this is what I've really been having to think about, is not only the actions do I take, are they good for me? Are they going to help me? Are they going to hinder me? But also really being cognizant that my actions will have an effect on the people around me, and will have sometimes a major effect. And so being cognizant of that is so important, in all of our decisions, whether we're, like I just said, buying something online, but really thinking about what we're doing and being aware and just very considerate of our actions, and very intentional. And it's back to perspective shift. That's been a major ongoing perspective shift in my life, is getting better about being intentional with what I do, with what I say, and just with how my interaction with the world. Because all in all, I would argue that's part of the definition of life, is how we interact with the world itself, which is oh so important.
Sully, you're incredible, man. You absolutely are. I, I love that perspective, and I think it more of a like a humanist perspective. I almost say something like globalist. I don't necessarily mean it in whatever politicized version of the word, like the word, but more
Right.
in like, you have a perspective that is not just outside of yourself, your own head, or outside of your local community or your state, but truly that global. We're all the same species, right? We're all human,
We are.
no matter where we come from. And I think that's actually in part, to go back to the China example highlighted there. The ideas that you're having about, hey, maybe work, or maybe the time spent at work isn't worth the gold, right? They've been having that thought in China, and that idiom's fairly old. So we're all connected, right? Is kind of the point I'm trying to make there.
Correct.
And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, the things that we do here do have impacts around the globe. When you were talking about, how when you buy something off of Amazon, you get it that 2 day shipping or whatever, and that's demand. One of the first things that came to my mind was, well, it's out of sight and out of mind, right? Like, you don't
Right.
see that impact. You see the package on your door. You don't see the trail of like what actually led to that package getting on the floor. And we've all heard the horror stories about like working on an Amazon floor, right?
Oh
But
yeah.
I think in some regard those are almost like ephemeral, like they aren't tangible, because they're just
Well,
a
let's take
story I
the
saw on
suicide nets, at the Apple's,
yeah, it's at
factory in
Foxconn.
China,
Yeah.
the Uyghur genocide, and it is a genocide happening right now. But we think there's a large sports manufacturer under the name of Nike in the United States that uses that cotton. But once again, out of sight, out of mind. And also, even in a business sense, it's actually fascinating how they go about that to avoid the laws, and even the companies in the states. And we must remember this when we buy from certain companies, is that technically they don't own the factory, they don't pay those workers, but that factory and the workers are contracted to only produce a certain product for a certain company. So it's almost like they have complete sway over them. But it's
Hmm.
fascinating to the links that we see some of these companies go to take advantage of that situation. And once again, yeah, so those globalist mindset of we must remember these things and really do our due diligence in what we do or who we buy from or the things we support. Really not just say, oh, I like this company or I like this candidate or I like this party, but really drill down into finding out what are the impacts and implications of our support for these businesses, people, parties, whatever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head with
And I must add this. I will apologize. I have to get just a little bit political. But you mentioned out of sight.
Drop the gloves.
You mentioned out of sight, out of mind. And better? What better situation to look at than the currently two horrible things happening: the Israel-Gaza conflict and the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. Out of sight, out of mind for many Americans. It is so easy for us to make judgments or to give our own suggestion. Oh, I'll give my 2 cents on that situation when we don't see the horrors and atrocities committed. We don't emotions. We don't mourn over a dead son or a dead father or a dead husband. We don't mourn over the dead children. We don't mourn over we don't see our homes destroyed, blown into a billion little pieces. We don't see the towns we were born and grew up in absolutely wiped off the face of the earth. We don't see the land, our country we love so much, destroyed and pretty much raised. I grew up in Mississippi and you grew up in Texas. So land for us, we have this strong connection to. I remember seeing the farmlands in Mississippi and you probably remember the ranch lands in Texas. Like wouldn't it just hurt you so bad to see those fields or those burnt down, the cattle shot, right? We think about these things of how hard it would be for us to describe them, but they're happening already. It's happening across the world, and it's just very sad to think about. And so when you said out of sight, out of mind, that stuff, and I just really have to pour out my heart on this because that is a big thing I see in the modern world, especially here in the States, is Ukraine, the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, and then the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Both of those are out of sight, out of mind for many Americans.
Yeah, no,
we have the biggest effect we have is a little bit of inflation,
Yeah,
and we can just pin that on the current president. That's easy, But everything else, out of sight, out of mind. And so it's yeah. I'll let you speak a little to it, because I know you also have a lot of object.
Yeah, I have very strong opinions when it comes to those conflicts. I'll say I think to kind of tie some of the points in is that quick to judge. I think a lot of judgment was passed on the war in Ukraine and the conflict in Israel. I guess right when the conflict started. I know a lot of people were very against sending money to Ukraine, even right when it started. There's the.
Oh wait, no, hold on. Let's correct ourselves. Not money. Sending actual things. We never sent money, like just straight dollar bills. It didn't happen.
I saw a meme about that where it was basically like if America asked Ukraine for its money back. To help with the hurricane repairs, which are tragedies going on, by the way. I don't want to diminish.
Oh, complete horrible tragedies. No, God, no.
But in return, instead of money, America gets a whole bunch of howitzers back because we didn't send money. We sent actual guns, right?
Exactly. Old guns that we were intending to replace, mostly intending to replace, or that we had no use for at the current time.
All the new contracts that are being given as a result of this actually help the American economy and.
Well, it's stimulating American companies.
And not only American companies, I guess MIC companies, which I know that's a whole can of worms. I won't get into it now. I know people are very, very opinionated about the MIC. But with looming conflicts on the horizon, something that I think is probably needed. I always think back to World War I when Russia found out that it was going through 40,000 shells in a week. And okay, 40,000 shells, that's not so bad. Russia produced at the time 40,000 shells a year. So, that's kind of where I feel like we are in some regards. So, it's a win for the American economy. It's a win for our nation's military. Now, people might have their own opinions on whether that is truly a win because of certain moral feelings. But getting back to the original point I was making is I think a lot of judgments were made initially about what's going on in Israel and what's going on in Ukraine. And I would invite people to reconsider maybe some of their opinions. Think about them critically, whether you support Ukraine or not, or whether you support Israel or not. Like, I think there's always an opportunity just to fact check yourself, to critically think about what you believe in. And you know what? You might critically think about it and be like, yeah, I still believe the exact same thing. And that's perfectly fine.
And that's fine.
Yeah, but at least you took the time to really
and
look
and we're not even say and we're not even say, oh, rethink who you throw your support behind, because that's definitely painting things black and white. Let's take the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. I mean, we both know this. There are many good, devout Russians out there,
Oh,
just as there are many good, devout Ukrainians out there. And same thing in the opposite. There are many horrible, corrupted Russian officials. There are also many corrupt Ukrainian officials. So to sit there and say like it's not black and white, which makes this difficult. However, I see people making it black and white where it shouldn't be. As it's not. It's definitely not black and white. And I'm not going to say there's a definite right wrong answer to the whole situation for both situations, but just challenging, maybe challenging some of your thoughts regarding certain things, or maybe just becoming a little bit more um, empathetic to the cause.
Yeah, absolutely. I think no matter what people take away, and great points about the nuance there. I think that's glossed over easy because it's really hard in like a news article to be like, well, you see the nuance of the situation, right? Like that.
Yeah.
I listened, for example, there's a podcast called the Martyr Made podcast, and I don't listen to any of the new stuff, so I can't speak to that. But he had the guy's name is Daryl Cooper. He had a couple episodes over kind of like Israel from when it started, like World War I through post World War I into like the Balfour Declaration in like 1947, through at the time I think it was 2014. But it was a roll up of like, how did we get here? Because even in 2014, that situation was so nuanced, and so a lot of people would look at that situation and be like, I'm not learning about that. Well, here we are 10 years later, and we're still discussing that place, like that exact place. So that entire podcast, like with the episodes, I want to say it's something like 20 hours, 16, 18, 20 hours of podcast. And I listened to all of it, and it's still so nuanced, even today, even with everything that's happened since almost a year ago today, the October 7th attacks of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, just so incredibly nuanced. And of course, you can say the exact same thing about the war in Ukraine. And I do have to get out there that I support Ukraine. I'm not a Russia supporter.
Oh yes,
in any,
same here.
In any sense.
Same here.
I think there's very clear reasons to support Ukraine. But there are, of course, there's nuance. Like you know this about me, but maybe the viewers here don't. I used to teach English online, and in the course of teaching English online, I taught many Russians, and that's something that weighs on me. Every time a drone footage thing pops up online and gains some traction, like I always wonder, like in the back of my head, like, did I know them? Did I like teach them English? Like stuff like that. And it's tough because the people I taught, when I taught them, they're very nice, kind people. Like they were passionate about learning English, and it's unfortunate, very very unfortunate what Putin's regime has forced a lot of young men and women in Russia to undergo, for sure. So, but all that to say, hey, there's nuance in the world, and people should absolutely recognize that. And kind of like to bring some of it back to your books, not only the judgment, but learning to love people, regardless of where what their background is, what your initial judgment of them was, but learning to really pour into those people, because just like I think the negative impacts of, say, the 2-day Amazon delivery system would be on people, I think you could also make a case that the positive words and the positivity you pour into people also has those types of second and third order consequences in like the physics sort of the word, not the not the negative sort of the word, for sure. So I have a couple more questions for you.
Okay.
So one of them is super general. Is there anything, I know we've been discussing having this for a while, and I'm so glad that we finally found tonight to do so. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about specifically while I have you here?
Oh, there could be so many tangents. That the problem is I can talk about almost and you know this almost any and everything. We'll say this. I will if anything comes up, I'll bring it up in one of our conversations. But I'll let it back to you to spur me with some more questions. And because you know how these go, you never know what the tangents will go down. But as far as I can think right now, there's just so much going on in the world,
Mm,
but before I start down that tangent, there's nothing specifically that I'm like, oh, this supersedes everything else,
sure.
currently.
Okay, so
So
I have.
please hit me with more questions. But if something comes up, I'll definitely let you know.
Okay, in that case, I have two. One is a very very lighthearted question, and I'll kind of preempt it.
Oh,
And
perfect.
then the second is kind of on the trail we're going down, or at least have been going down. So the first one is so normally when we would talk, we would not be. I think we're about 17 hours and 30 or so minutes away from each other right now. Now you could just get on I-70 and we'd essentially be right where each other are. But normally we'd be having a nice liquor, probably whiskey, maybe a beer, and a
Oh yeah,
cigar.
or
So
tequila.
or tequila, a little something to get the juices flowing. Right now, today I'm just
Yeah.
rocking a water, so my apologies. Um,
Oh, I got a cup of tea, so
yeah,
that's where I'm
okay,
at.
yeah, nice cup of tea, but
Nice cuppa.
any a nice cuppa. But any good cigars recently? Any good, or have you tried a new like maybe a new beer or a new whiskey or something along
Ooh,
those lines?
all right. So many above here. Well, we'll go from cigars to pipes
Okay.
to beer, and then maybe round it out. So, cigar wise, I think I don't know if I've introduced you to one, but I am a huge fan of the Ave Maria cigars. That
Yes,
they're
you have
great,
actually. Yes, yes.
good, medium body. Just if you don't know what to smoke, go for Ave Maria. They're great cigars. When you were here on my porch one night, we had the Baccarats. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
big fan of those. They're a nice, easy, mellow cigar. And then as far as my hearty cigars, I'll go with the first cigar actually I ever bought for myself, and that was a Man of War. So
Mm.
Ave Marias, Man of Wars, Baccarats. I'd say those are my top three cigars right now. I still do have a nice little collection of Cubans that I won't speak about where they came from, but
Yeah,
we have them in
Nicaragua.
the states
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely Nicaraguan.
Honduras.
But yeah, so there you go. So those are my three cigars right now. I currently keep a hefty amount. So yeah, I of course will buy one-offs if I'm at a cigar shop, but those are the three that I buy actual boxes of at a time.
Mm.
Now, pipe tobacco, one of my favorites, and it's actually really fairly priced, is Lane 1Q is the name and code of the tobacco. So Lane Tobacco Company is like Lane Limited, I believe is the name of the company, and then 1Q is the specific tobacco. It's a great mellow vanilla tobacco or vanilla notes to it,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's a great tobacco. Now, if I'm and then I believe the one that I have in tin can is the Dunhill or what is it? The Dunhill Scottish mixture, I believe, is
Mm-hmm.
what it is. And I just have such a nostalgic attachment since I smoked that one on top of a hotel with my professor in Istanbul.
Uh,
I smoked it in a park bench in Lucerne, Switzerland. So I have great memories with that specific tobacco, mainly because I find it everywhere in these nice tins. And then so I think I have one that has Greek lettering, one that has Turkish lettering, one that has German lettering. So it's like it's nice to I'm slowly getting used to that just because of its availability. And I know it's a good tobacco. It's a little bit more pricier, but it's still a great tobacco.
mm-hmm.
Ooh, and then alcohol wise, so uh, I don't know. You've had my favorite beer of all time, like my absolute favorite beer, Frua, right?
I
Frua
actually
is
don't
a
know if I had Frua.
it's a Kölsch
Mm-hmm.
from Köln, and it's by far my favorite beer. It's called Frua, FRU, so U with an umlaut H. And actually, the first time I ever had it was in Köln or Cologne, as we would
I was
say in
about to say,
English,
I was about to
at the
congratulate you
brewery.
on your beautiful coon like pronunciation. Um,
Yes, and it's called a Kush, not a Kolsch. It's a Kush.
Kush.
Just a
Yeah,
heads
hey,
up.
yeah. For all you
That,
beer
that,
guys
Kush.
listening, yeah. Hey, come on,
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
get on it.
For the
Yeah,
beer aficionados out there, let's get this together.
yeah.
So yeah,
Kulschbitte.
love it. And then Warsteiner has an Oktoberfest beer, which has been which has been definitely tickling my fancy lately. It's been pretty good. Whiskey wise, I'm here in Colorado, and Stranahan's is actually a pretty good whiskey. Oh yeah, no, I still have some favorites. Um, but I think I've been on the whole bartending scene for a while now, and
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely still a hobby of mine for sure.
That's good. Yeah, no, well, beautiful recommendations. I'll have to try Fua at some point.
If you
Uh,
can find it, it's so
yeah, if
it's
I can
so hard
find
to
it. Yeah.
find, but if you can find, yeah, if you find it, buy as many as you can. It's completely worth it. 10 out of 10, recommend.
That actually brings me to actually I had to type this out so I wouldn't forget it while you were talking. You mentioned Istanbul, and then you just talked about if I ever make my way to
Lovely
Köln.
city,
So for those who don't know, Sully and I, for I guess probably about a year now, have been chatting about
give or take.
our eventual world trip that we're going to try to take from call it Portugal to
That
call
we're
it
gonna try to
yeah,
survive.
call it Beijing, right? So just Eurasia the trip, right? And yeah, just mentioning Istanbul, mentioning Köln, made me think about that. Actually, I had to type it while we were chatting. So sorry if you heard typing. I was not ignoring you. I just wanted to make sure
Oh no, you're
I
good.
asked
I did
this.
not hear anything on my end.
All that to say, so on our hypothetical, our future, it will be real one day, trip from say Portugal to say Beijing. Um, do you have what would you be most excited to see?
Oh, that is
And it doesn't
a
have to be one place. It could be multiple. I'll allow it.
yeah.
Because I
So
remember we've talked about Istanbul, so that's what really
in, in a very general sense, and this is what, in my opinion, the most exciting thing about traveling, especially when you travel like we're planning from one area that is so vastly different from another, and every country you're going to go through gets more and more different.
hmm
And this is going to be a very general concept, but I'm so excited to see the shifting cultures and perspectives. And I first got on this fascination with it. So when I went from Istanbul to the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which is debated, I'll just say Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, but
Yeah, sure.
it could or
I'm
could
more
not
of a
be part
Greek
of actual
Cyprus guy.
Cyprus.
I don't know,
No,
but
I-
I'm
it's
kidding. I'm
it's
kidding.
one area of Cyprus. When I say Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, there is a specific cultural separation there, so I'll give them that.
Mm.
But so I went from Istanbul to Northern Cyprus, went to Southern Cyprus, and then to Athens, Greece, all in the same trip. It is absolutely fascinating to see how different, but also similar, the cultures were. The things they appreciated, didn't appreciate, how they saw, viewed ideas, customs, mannerisms, etc. And that's what I'm most excited about. And I'll hold that tangent. Remember that for a moment, the differences and the similarities. Hold that in your mind. But that's what I'm most excited for is because I've been to, let's see here, I've been to most countries in Europe. So Portugal, Spain, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, and the UK and Ireland. Yeah. And so I'm familiar with the massive differences between cultures between those countries. But then moving further into Eastern Europe is going to be um, actually I'm really excited for because I don't have an experience with that culture. I don't have any family ties to that culture. I just have no preconceived notion of the culture, and so I'm quite excited to see that and then see how that culture. How it comes into perspective or how it relates to, but also differs from the cultures we see before. Now, the tangent I wanted to get to about similarities and differences is that it is so easy when we travel, and I've traveled with people who have done this, where they say, "Oh, this is different than America," right? Or this is different. It's very easy to note the differences when we travel. The differences in language, naturally, in customs, mannerisms, culture, song, food, even if it's skin color, ethnicity. It's so easy to focus on all those differences. Even here in the States, we see that between different states, between people, groups, whatever, that I strongly encourage people when you travel, do your absolute best. Even if you have to keep a journal of similarities, of how you can find ways to connect with the people you meet, because that is going to trump any difference that you see. Finding a similarity in a positive, good, human connection with the people you meet is going to absolutely bring so much joy, knowledge, and a great learning moment to you when you meet these people, when you search deep down for those similarities. Because I truly, without a doubt, believe that no matter who we talk to on this earth, we will be able to find at least something similar. Um, and that's just such an important thing. To go back to the reading a little bit, that's why it's so important to read, is because you build a relationship with the characters you read about, and usually these characters are not going to be similar to you. There's a lovely quote: I don't want to be friends with a person who is pretty much a parrot of what I say, who thinks what I think, who does everything exactly. My shadow does that better, right? I don't want to be friends with a person who
I
follows
like
me,
that.
right?
Yeah.
My shadow does that. And so I encourage people, when you travel, don't focus so much on, oh, this is so different, this is different. But really, if you do focus on the difference, focus on, like, if it's a good difference. But I really encourage you, strongly encourage people, really hone in on those similarities. Because for example, when I was in Turkey, one thing I came to really, there's so many things I could talk about, like, oh, the Turks do this different, or they do this different. But one thing I learned that I absolutely loved and appreciated, and that as a man coming from the South in the United States, was hospitality. So you hear about, Southern hospitality. Well, I saw that kind of hospitality in Turkey, where the people were so kind, amiable, hospitable, and it was amazing to see that. And that was a similarity that I saw, that I learned to absolutely appreciate and love the Turkish people and culture for. And so, yeah, I'll stop there before I could go on all night.
No, I think that's great, and I think that kind of strikes an itch for me because I think that's one of the reasons why I like language so much, and in
Oh, yes.
particular Mandarin. Of course, I think German to a great extent, German to a great extent, Russian, but I think I got incredibly blessed, really, learning Mandarin when I did because I also being from the South. There's we'll just call it not at least back when I was learning Mandarin in just like school grade years. It wasn't really a big Chinese diaspora where I lived, so it was really cool to learn that empathy. Really, that language taught me. I had to learn about a completely new, alien, foreign culture, um, and I think it's just been incredible to like see that in my life and see like the connections you make as opposed to the differences that you kind of hide away from, but rather those connections that language helps bring about. The other day, actually, here in Dayton, I went to Sarah was out of town, so I had the pleasure of being able to choose where I wanted to go for church, and I decided on going to a Chinese church. And at first, I was worried. I was like, "Oh my gosh, am I going to be welcome?" It's like I don't know. But I'm kind of kicking myself for thinking that way because they're Christians just like I am, and the only difference is they speak Mandarin, and that's not really a difference with me because I also speak Mandarin, and
Right.
I cannot tell you. Like I can't speak highly enough of that church, the Dayton Chinese Church. By the way, if anyone happens to stop by, it was so good. Like the people were so hospitable to me. Like I walked in and these people, they took me right under their wing immediately. They invited me out to lunch that same day. Then they invited me to pickleball that same day. The next day they invited me to play badminton and they invited me over for
Wow.
like a lunch. And then after lunch they're like, "Oh man, that was good. So what about dinner?" And then we invited me to dinner as well. Like it I have never been so welcomed by a group of people that I was so honestly like apprehensive about meeting in the first place. So really, to your point, I think we have a lot more similarities than differences, and I agree with you. I think I could sit down over a nice cup of cha or chai or tea or whatever.
Well, chai is tea, so
Yeah,
to say chai
it's
tea is
so
just redundant.
yeah. Well, so is cha. So um, but all that to say, I think we'd sit down with just about anyone, and we could find those similarities. And that also reminds me of another time when I was in China back in 2017, and I was on a bus, and there was a whole bunch of Chinese kids that were my age, and just chatting about like all the things we had in common. And I think just another like eye-opening event because like I learned all about Chinese culture. I'd never experienced it in China, and it was so cool to see what was actually rather similar. They're asking me the typical questions. So, who do you like? Like, do you play video games? Stuff like that, which is, I think, pretty universal. So, I completely
And
agree.
that
And
actually,
I look forward to that during our trip to find all the similarities.
oh, for sure. And that brings me to actually another. thought I just had. And I encourage, once again, people, learn a language. Before if you know you're going to travel somewhere, do your best. Just learn a few words. Learn a thank you, a hello, a welcome, a good day.
Hello, thank you,
But also,
please. Yep.
yeah, and then also learn the culture. And Wyatt, I'm going to steal a little story from you, and actually I want you to help me tell it. But what made me uh, really appreciate that concept was two things you had said. One, when you were in the Vatican, uh, the guide, I believe it was, told you to be a Catholic for a day, right?
Yeah, he told me to drop my Protestant sword and shield and be a Catholic, and
Exactly.
I took it, and it was an incredible experience.
And you would say that you leave behind your like you said, your sword and shield, your defensive personality, and just really throwing yourself into something just for a moment, even knowing, because once again, there's another great quote: is the mark of an intelligent mind or of an intelligent man, either way I'm paraphrasing, to entertain any idea without accepting it. So you must be able to entertain it, but it doesn't mean you have to accept it. So anyway, what you did there was you entertained this idea completely to its fullest degree, but that doesn't mean you had to accept it as law. And then you would say it improved your experience, yes?
Oh, undoubtedly, undoubtedly.
And then that leads me to the second story. Now, this is something we have both shared, albeit at way different times. However, there's a small Teutonic cemetery to the left of St. Peter's in the Vatican, where if you speak a greeting to the Swiss guards, a little grüezi, and ask them for passage into this cemetery, and they'll let you in. And so the cemetery is originally it's meant for German Catholic German pilgrims, and so that's why you would need to speak German to the guards. But having been there myself, I kind of gave you the heads up. But for you, just taking the time to learn the history of the area, learn that cultural idea, and then learning a little bit of the language, you were able to also have that same experience and that encounter, which is very beautiful indeed.
Absolutely, and I think like learning the history of of the knights defending the queen there. That kind of
Oh
helped
no,
me.
that's a Swiss guard defending the Pope.
Sorry, I've slept since then. But learning that history helped me enjoy going there more, because if I would have just learned some of the language and been like grüezi, give my crisp salute and move on with my life, okay, great, it's a graveyard, right? Like, but learning
Right.
that history really I think helped cement like going there and feeling the gravity of all of the German diaspora that like was like fundamental to Catholicism in so many different ways, not just a Teutonic way, but you're
Right.
seeing in there like scientists and writers, stuff like that, and not to mention that chapel in there is it's small, but it's incredibly powerful. Yeah, what a
It is.
beautiful place. What a
And for me, it was the skeleton, like the skeletal
yeah, the
symbolism you
memento
saw.
mori, right? Like,
Yes,
and
which
you
is
know what?
actually the.
To your
Go ahead.
point, that's something that got brought up to me. Of course, not knowing the culture, if you just see, oh, there's skeletons on the wall, that's kind of weird. I was showing pictures to a family member, and they said exactly that. But I was able to talk to it and be like, no, this is actually to remind you that, like, you see how he's holding the hourglass, like, that you only have so much time.
Tempus
So,
fugit memento mori. Time flies, remember death.
yep. And, well, it sure does. So I think it was cool to be able to know that there and not be creeped out by some skeleton on the wall, but instead,
And it is macabre for sure.
sure,
But I would argue that I guess that initial feeling of discomfort is important because, as you just spoke to, you really understood the gravity of death itself. And that's not something a lot of people are willing to encounter. But when you see this skeleton, on the wall of this church, you're forced to come face to face with an uncomfortable truth. I'm surprised they didn't have death on one side and taxes on the other, but
they didn't have Ben Franklin in there,
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, you're forced to encounter this uncomfortable truth. And this actually speaks to a lot of things that we just got talking about with Ukraine and Russia and with Palestine and Israel, is challenging ourselves to face uncomfortable truths, or maybe just uncomfortable facts that we may disagree with, but they're uncomfortable. But their point is they're uncomfortable. Reading books, like not every book I read is the way I believe. I read books from atheists, from like Lewis is not Catholic. I read his books. I read books from people of different sexual orientations, of different whatever. You know, because even if it, I'm not saying all those make me uncomfortable, but the point I'm making is it's important to go out of your way and sometimes challenge, like we said, those notions we have, and then really get that discomfort in order to come out of it better. And so by walking into this church that is macabre, discomforting, a little bit, you know, it's heavy. It's just
Mm-hmm.
heavy. But being able to walk through that, experience it, and then come out of it and be able to say, well, now that has given me a better appreciation for my own life is a beautiful thing. And it's so important for people to go out of that comfort zone, to go out of the bubble, to whatever, and experience those things. And so I'm very glad, I'm very happy that you were able to speak to that, to your family a little bit about just the meaning behind it. When the initial reaction is a little bit of disgust, would you say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which reminds me of the Capuchin Crips, but we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. So, um, so all that to say, I think our boys' world trip is going to be pretty good. you know,
Oh yeah,
Whether it's
for sure.
finding the similarities or maybe going outside of our comfort zone. Because like our intention.
Well, if we don't, it's a failed trip.
Yeah, exactly. If we don't get outside of our comfort zone, it's wrong. Also, if we don't pick up a cool outfit in every like kind of major region we go to, like I'm gonna be upset. By the way, just throwing that out
I'm
there.
most excited about the Middle East. I'm gonna be honest.
I was
I'm just
thinking
so excited.
Middle East and India, like we're balling.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna be incredible. And I think our intention, if we can, is do it on the ground, right? Don't do as
Oh
little
yes,
as we can
completely,
by air, right? If not at all by air.
completely.
Um,
Yeah, by train as much as possible.
And I think that would be a great way not only to see the world. I mean, I remember I went on a 22-hour train ride from Dallas to Milwaukee, 20 hours to Chicago, and then 2 hours to Milwaukee from Dallas. Um, but I was able to see so much of the countryside that I just never would have seen before. I got to meet a whole bunch of very interesting
Was
people.
that for was that for the ROTC?
Yeah, it was. It
Um,
was for the Arnold Air
cheese
Society.
cheese
Yeah,
cheese con as we
yeah,
called it.
yeah. Up in Milwaukee, they had a conference
Ugh.
that it was Cheese Con because of Milwaukee. So I was cheesing it in Milwaukee. But yeah, I think trains are cool. So it'd be cool to take a train, and I'm not sure what the train routes are when we start getting into places like Syria, but well,
Oh,
that's
we'll
a later
figure it out
problem. Yeah, that's a later problem for sure. So,
completely.
but
Oh yeah,
I think we'll
and
have a
you
good time.
speaking of trains, well, this is my little plug. I just wish that we were encouraged more train travel in the United States. I really just, it's such a beautiful thing to see in Europe, and
Mm.
it's fairly cheap and it's very environmentally friendly compared to like many other ways of transport. So I just, strongly encourage. I wish the United States would step it up with our rail system a little bit.
Yeah, at least our public rail system.
Oh yeah,
I know China actually. To talk about them, they invested very heavily in high speed rail, which is something that I envy. Now of course it cost them more than a pretty penny to build that entire
naturally.
network, and they might have some very serious inflation and economic ramifications still yet to come because of that. However, they have fast trains, so that's cool. And I wish to an extent, like it'd be awesome to be able to drive to a major nearby city and then take a train and go somewhere. Like just because I think it's
And
such a
for a reasonable price
if it's a
too.
reasonable
We
price,
need to.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, naturally. But it's such a good way, just from my experience, to see the countryside. I've always said if you ever want to write a book and you don't know what to make a character and you're lost on that, just go take a train, take an Amtrak. You'll find your
Oh
character on the train, I promise. So,
yeah.
um, yeah, and honestly, the observation cars, just had so much fun hanging out with friends and being in those observation cars, watching the countryside pass
Oh,
through.
for sure. I
So,
took a train from Heidelberg, Germany to Lucerne, Switzerland, and then
mm,
Lucerne, Switzerland to Milan, Milan to Florence, Florence to Venice. And speaking of countryside and just first meeting people,
mm-hmm,
fascinating. You meet, especially a European train, is wild because you never know who you're going to meet. I met a lovely couple from uh, the man was from Croatia and the woman was a U.S. born, and it's just really interesting hearing their story. But also like the countryside, absolutely gorgeous, crossing the
mm,
rivers, weaving through the mountains. And what's insane is we actually have a little bit of that here in the States. If you take the California Zephyr, say from Denver to Salt Lake City,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to go through the Rockies. I would encourage anyone to do it.
Yeah. I think you definitely win with your scenery over in Europe or the Rockies compared to the one I took to the Midwest.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for farmland, and that's something like we get in spades here. So.
Well, see, I saw it for 18 years, so I guess maybe I don't mind putting it down for a little bit.
Yeah. We'll come back to that later. Well, that's good. But I think we're gonna have whenever this trip happens, it's gonna be incredible. I mean.
Oh, it will for sure.
So I'm excited about that.
We'll have to have another whole podcast the day before and then the day after we get back.
Well, we might need days to record.
For sure. Oh, yeah.
I'm not like a big like a journal keeper. Like I don't necessarily keep a diary or anything like that. I've tried.
Don't worry, I am a massive journal keeper, so I got you covered.
Well, I've got to learn your ways because that's something I want to be. I don't want to start necessarily a journal while I'm doing a trip like that. I'd like to continue a journal. Once I've gotten into the rhythm and it's part of my routine.
But what else would be good is we could do video logs.
Oh, true. Yeah.
That's actually a great way, and if you feel like that'd be better interaction, that's also a really unique way of journaling. And so whenever I don't have my journal with me, if I forget it on the off chance, I sometimes just take my phone and I have a video log, and then later on I will transcribe that in some way into my journals.
Yeah, see, I like the maybe from the historical value paper, but that actually might just be a slightly dated concept on my part, just with how ubiquitous the internet is nowadays, and how big the Pie White Tail YouTube channel is. I mean, it'd be great.
For sure. But also, I would argue, I love this very early point. You mentioned your handwriting. See, I don't want to brag. I think I have fairly good handwriting.
So you have incredible handwriting.
Okay, I love it. And for the people out there, I've been writing cursive since second grade of school, and I have not stopped. And if you journal as much as I do, or just even if I'm working and I take notes, I just try to write as much as possible. I will say, and I love writing Christmas cards too. So yes, but and I'll go on another tangent. Wyatt, my mind jumping around. If anyone is out there trying to learn a language, and Wyatt, I think I may have talked to you a bit about this, but I don't remember if I did. But if anyone's trying to learn a language, there's a specific action that I strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to do. Let's say if you're learning German, and I'm a little bit biased as a German speaker, but let's say you're learning German. Eventually, you're going to hopefully be able to travel to a German-speaking country. When you do, journal in that language. This is was a tool used by many polyglots across history. Specifically, my great grandfather on my mom's side was an ambassador from Germany to Africa for the German Empire, and he knew multiple languages. And so, what his strategy was. A little subtle flex, but what his strategy was journaling in the language of the country he was in. So he was in Tanzania, so he would have been journaling in, at the time, either a mixture of German, but also a little bit, I believe it's Swahili was the language. But don't quote me on that. You might want to fact check that. But yes, I would strongly encourage you, if you're trying to learn a language and eventually you hopefully get the opportunity and do everything you can to make that opportunity happen, to travel to that country of said language you're learning, journal in the language, and it will improve your skills like no tomorrow, because then you're starting to think in that language. You're starting to put what you, and if you have to use a translator, that's fine, but just make sure you really use those skills in writing. Anyway, there's my small pro tip for language learning.
No, that's an incredible pro tip. I'd actually even recommend, like, if you are learning a language, just because we're on that topic, we'll use German as an example. If you're learning German, like, you don't have to wait till you get to Germany to start that diary.
God, no.
For a while, I kept a diary in Mandarin, and honestly, it helps teach you a lot of those common words that you might not have, like, the word for off the top of your head, right? Like, if you, like, I'm looking at my computer, so if I didn't know what computer was while I'm writing my diary, okay, so I have to look it up, and then I learn it, and then, hey, presto, it sticks. So I only really did that in the context of learning a language for a bit, but it helped quite a bit. And I think, to your point, Sully, it helped even more when you're in the environment. I think that's one point that you can't replicate online or anything like that.
Completely.
You got to be there. You got to be immersed. But when you are, like, it's so easy. To something you were saying is like thinking in that language, and not like thinking of, like, to use a Chinese example. I always use this one, but huo means fire, right? In my mind, I don't think of fire in the English sense anymore, just because I've learned the language well enough. I think of huo as huo. I think of just that word in that language as that word in that language. I'm not translating, if that makes sense.
Mine is like for cell phone, we would say in German Handy,
Yeah,
Handy.
sure.
I just call it mein Handy. Wo ist mein Handy? Or sometimes if I'm English, I'm like, where is my handy at? It's
Yeah.
like, so I understand that. And if you look through my journals, it's kind of funny because I kind of swap this little hybrid. I would say I think about 70% in English, 30% in German, but it definitely leads to some very interesting conversation. Now, it does, of course, and you probably may agree with this, when you're speaking to most people, you do have a stutter every now and then because you have to remind yourself to translate certain words, like handy, for example, in my case, to cell phone. And so before I say it, I might pause just for a split second, but it can get noticeable a little bit.
There's a couple, especially when like, I guess there's a couple words in like Chinese cuisine that I learned first in Mandarin and second in English. Just because the way my teacher taught Mandarin growing up was you learn it in Chinese classes conducted solely in Chinese, right? There is not English, or if there is English, it's incredibly limited. So a lot of these words I learned first in Mandarin and then in English. So I'm kind of doing the opposite. We're like baozi, steam bun, is what that is, and that word trips me up every time, just because like I know it in Mandarin. I'm like baozi, what does that mean? You're like hong shao ro. I think literally it translates to like red seared pork, or like red seared pork. Another word I learned in Chinese first. Or there's something called typo sambai. When I went to China, it's a delicacy. It's like a fish, a plant, and like shrimp. It literally means the three whites of Taihu Lake, which like I'm not. If anyone asks me about Taihu Sambai, I'm just going to talk to them about Taihu Sambai, and that's it. I'm not saying, well, the three whites of Taihu Lake, right? Like, that's not. So, but I agree. There are some points where I have to be like, ooh, hold on. What is that in English? And that has tripped me up, so I agree.
And then my last thing that I speaking to the people who are learning language is when you travel to a country, do not for one instant fear or hesitate just trying to speak the language. Do not think that people will insult you for messing a word up. Do not think that, at least in my case, I have not met a single person in all. I've been to 30 countries, and I have not met a single person when I'm trying to speak certain languages of certain countries, like even if it's just a thank you or hello. I don't know how many of those I can say in different languages, but I have never had someone give me a dirty look for trying to use the mother tongue of their country, right? And so I encourage anyone who out there even if you say to yourself, oh, I know I've been studying this language for 2 or 3 years, but I don't think I'm good enough yet to go to no, don't let that stop you. Travel. When people figure out, or look for, in my case, once again, every person I've met that has realized that I'm trying to learn a language better has been the most helpful, nicest, just absolute joy to talk to and really work with. It's like they really want to work with you because it is special to them. It is special to these people. And so, yeah, don't ever hesitate to just test out your language skills. Wyatt, you mentioned when you were in Germany how at the very split second beginning you were like a little bit hesitant with your German, and then instantly you were off taking it because you knew that the guy wasn't going to insult you if you mispronounced a word. If anything, they're just trying to help you out.
No, absolutely. And I would also like add, don't beat yourself up if you are like hesitant to start. Like I mentioned this earlier, like I was worried about speaking Chinese I've been learning Chinese for like over a decade now, right? So it'll be it's hard. It really is. It's something you have to learn. And like, even, I'm a gray beard of learning Mandarin, for people in the West. But, even with that, like, don't beat yourself up, but also don't worry, right? Like if you worry a bit, like, okay, got it. Like that, maybe it's social anxiety in my case. I don't know. But at the same time, nobody's going to like, tear into you because you pronounced a word long. In fact, like most times, like when I was in China, or even like the other weekend when I was talking to all the people from the very nice church, I'd pronounce something weird and we'd have a nice laugh about it, right? That's the worst that happened. It's honestly, and I think you learn better that way.
Oh no, I
it kind
agree
of sucks,
wholeheartedly.
but if you drop your pride and you just accept that, hey, I'm gonna make some mistakes. That's okay. Um, then then that's it, and I
Yeah,
promise you're
to
gonna
make
learn
people feel
faster.
and to make people feel better, I am like why I mentioned I'm a German citizen. I'm all German, all American, but I am German. I've been around the German language for 24 years now because my mother is immigrant, so she speaks quite a bit of German. And I can still tell you, when I go to Germany, I do hesitate at the very beginning to actually speak German. Now, by God, I should know German well enough to not hesitate, but I still do because, much to Wyatt's point, it's just you do, and I even still make mistakes myself, and it's even more so. Wyatt, you'll be able to speak to this. When you go to a country, especially in most foreign languages, there are different dialects. Here in the States, we might say different accents, but in most countries, the dialect can mean completely different words. And
Mm-hmm.
Wyatt, once again, sometimes I've laughed. I was in Switzerland. I don't speak Schweizerdeutsch very well, and so I would mostly speak Hochdeutsch. And the Swiss guy I was talking to, he made this comment. He said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Es tut mir leid. My language is such a bastardization of yours," and we laughed about it. And I was like, "This is some fun, self-deprecating humor," and I'm glad he sees the faults in the Swiss language. No, the Swiss have a beautiful language. I'll give you that. But yeah, no, it's great. And so even if you don't know the dialect, use what language you do know. Use to the best of your ability, and you never know. You at least there will be mutually intelligible words, phrases. But it's honestly it's going to be mutually intelligible for the most part. But sometimes you'll have complete differences. And once again, that's a learning moment. Wyatt, if you're in China, not everyone speaks, or everyone does, most part, speak Mandarin straight, but there's also, what, hundreds of dialects, if not more?
Yeah, it's so many. Like every
And
town has
so,
its local dialect, and they're not
and I'm
mutually
sure
intelligible is the problem.
yeah, but I'm sure you picked up some words across your travels in China of just different words that people use for the same thing,
Mm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And so I learned that even within Germany, I speak Hochdeutsch. The Bayern, the Deutsch of Bayern, what's the word? It's like Bayernisch. It's probably completely wrong. I probably butchered that, but it's different. It's like in Spain, Catalan. So if you go to
Mhm.
Barcelona, Catalan is very different than Spanish, and so you see this across many countries. And so just because if you're in Barcelona, don't be afraid to speak Spanish. If you're in Munich, don't be afraid to speak Hochdeutsch. If you're in Switzerland, don't because once again, you'll laugh about it, you'll find more connections there, and you'll learn more. So don't ever hesitate to even if you say this is not the perfect language, just do your best and try. Because honestly, I'm sure it's easier for a Swiss German speaker. It's easier for them to understand German, like Hochdeutsch, than it is English. So you're still getting a little bit better across.
Yeah, and I think that that last point, I think anyone from any culture can really appreciate is that aspect of just trying. I think
Yeah.
that speaks volumes. I always say there's nothing better than speaking to someone in their mother tongue. Uh, Other than the second best thing is probably trying to speak to someone in their mother tongue, right? Like recognizing that
Yes.
effort, recognizing that like, hey, like you've taken that step to learn my language, like that's incredible. And I find it so
They're seeing
sad.
the sparkle in their eyes, just
Yeah,
seeing that
exactly.
spark in their eyes of like, oh my goodness.
It's from the show Modern Family, so I don't even know how I'm dragging this one up. But at one point, there's a Spanish lady on there, and she tells one of the other actors, "You have no idea how smart I am in Spanish," just because her English isn't that great. And I think it's so sad to see people that like, oh well, you don't speak good English, right? Okay, but they really are trying, and like I think that is.
I'm so glad you brought this point up. I have a personal story regarding that point. So my grandfather, my mom's dad, God, I could go on about his life, East Germany, the West Germany, etc. But when he came to the States, so also this goes out to my mother. Neither my mother nor ever took an English course. Like they never had anyone teach them English. It was all self-taught. But so anyway, my grandfather naturally, as you would imagine, still thinks everything in German. My mother, not so much. It's probably like 60-40. But my grandfather, he still thinks completely in German. Now, my grandfather, in my opinion, is probably the smartest man I've ever met in my entire life. However, he has told me himself, he says, Matthew, sometimes I'm scared to talk to Americans, or because they think I'm dumb. They think I'm slower to thought. They think I'm not intellectual. And the reason why is because he has to translate every single word that he thinks into English, and that slows him down to a great degree. And so most English speaker, like most Americans, he has that fear that you just said. So on our side, if we see a person not speaking English, we kind of judge their intelligence. But even that's how they feel. So it's like the person is afraid to speak to us sometimes, and even in like slow, broken English. So that goes to another point: is when you hear someone speak slow, broken English, do not talk louder in English, thinking that they're going to understand you better. That's kind of insulting. But also be
Very
very
insulting.
cognizant
Yeah.
that it is extremely, but be very cognizant and considerate that they are doing their best to speak to you in your tongue, and don't judge them, don't belittle them for it, but rather do your best to help them, have patience with them, and assume that they are actually a very intelligent individual. They're just learning a new language.
Also,
It
I'm
goes
sure.
out to all the people there who,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
completely agree. And I think it's easy for us in the states to forget how hard English is. You know,
Oh
I got
God,
to witness that.
it's a shitty language. Pardon
I
my French, but it is a. Mm,
no, I really learned that when I taught English online and then in person. When I like high school, early college, um, it's hard, and you know, and like other languages don't really have like spelling bees because things are spelled like they sound. In English is
exactly,
an
like German.
exception to the rule. Yeah, German no spelling bees, Russian no spelling bees. You might have like character writing bees in Chinese, like okay maybe,
Gotcha.
but in English like the word kernel. I'm looking at that word on my wall right now. From I have my actually funny enough my grandfather, when he was a captain in the army, he went to the army language school, and he really wanted to go for German, and instead they sent him there. I'm looking at his certificate for passing right now. They sent him there for Arabic. But the person that signed off is a colonel, and you would think that colonel is spelled not Colonel, because it doesn't sound like colonel. It sounds like
Right.
kernel, like the thing you
Well,
like a kernel of
I'm
corn.
looking at I'm looking at the title of this chat, the military commission. The
Mm-hmm.
Shen, like, where does that come from?
Yeah, yeah, no. Out in the name of our chat, the Central Military Commission. Yeah, for those who don't know, I have a little Discord of all the little people I meet, and anyways, it's Communist Party themed. Anyway, we could just skip over that. It's a bit of a joke.
Oh,
But yeah, no, oh man, I know us. We could talk about language. Yeah,
oh,
all day.
we could.
And again, I think that stuff like that, whenever we do our boys trip, that's going to be so incredibly important. It really just like the effort, right? Like, hey, like I don't speak Arabic, for example, right? And like certainly,
I'm
if I
learning Arabic, so
oh really, yeah,
that's been so that's actually been a very very slow but unique journey.
yeah.
And yeah.
No, that's incredible, and like having even just a little bit of knowledge is going to be so incredibly helpful whenever we go, and just in general. You know, America. While most people speak English here, there is no official language of the United States. I think that's one of the best things our country ever decided, because I love the diversity that can bring, and to that end, if you meet someone here in the United States that speaks Arabic, I'm happy to hear about it. And I'd love to, yeah, just shoot me a text, call me. I'd really
For
love
sure.
to hear
No,
about
I,
that.
I will tell you all about it. Don't worry.
Yeah. So one last question to wrap up. We've kind of talked generally to this, but to be a bit more specific, before we wrap up here, what's something you wish more people considered in their day-to-day lives? And I think we have a couple good contenders from what we've talked about. So if it's one of the things we've talked about tonight, that is completely fine. But if it's something different, I'd love to hear it too.
Ooh, let me think here. So something that more people should consider in their day-to-day lives. Hmm. Why? This is a big can of worms that you should have never opened. But I'll go through an overarching one, and then maybe we can drill down a little bit.
Sure.
But in the current world, where I would say it's easy to be very cynical in the modern world. It's very easy to feel like everything's going to hell in a handbasket. It's I mean, if you open up the news or whatever, you really just see war, atrocity, argument, etc.
Hmm.
But I guess what I want people to consider, and what my biggest message would be, is remember the creation that we live in. And when I say creation, I mean the world and everything in it. Creation is a such a beautiful, beautiful thing, um, and with a majority of, in my opinion, good people. Um, and so I want people to consider just how like how um, intentional are they with the time they spend in our creation here, right? So, for example, next time you are walking outside, take a moment to just really appreciate the wind on your face, the cool air, the warm air, depending on where you are. I was sitting on my porch. I remember a very vivid memory of this very small thing. I remember sitting outside and I saw the first butterfly of spring, and it made me so happy. And I just remember the little bit of joy I got from that. And I thought to myself, this is what's like one of the big meanings of life, is being able to just find these beautiful, beautiful moments, because I promise you they are everywhere. They are in the people you talk to, in just in your daily walks, in even in your work or your drive or whatever. I would strongly encourage people just to take a little bit of a moment to really find something to appreciate about this beautiful, beautiful, great, wonderful world we live in, and to not let the weight of society, like, the weight of pressure, I guess, put you down. Um, Now, this is like a more of a humanist philosophy, as you, I guess you could say. My big fear is, this ties into it for the world, is we live in a very relativistic world. So moral, ethical relativism, in my opinion, is that's a whole nother tangent. We'll have another conversation on. But if you're living in that relativist mindset where you're quote unquote keeping with the times or comparing to the times, etc., you're going to develop a very cynical viewpoint of the world. But harken back to remember that this world has been spinning for a long time. Think about the literature we've seen. Epic of Gilgamesh is 4,000 years old, I believe, maybe even older. And it's beautiful art that we still get to appreciate to this day. And that goes from 5,000 years all the way up to the modern present. There's billions of pieces of literature, of art, of plays, of musicals. We've talked about plays tonight. We've talked about travels. We've talked about people, countries, cultures, everything. And I wish people would, and maybe people already do, and I'm just speaking to the choir, but I've definitely had to become better about taking a genuine interest in the world around me and learning to really truly appreciate everything that this world can have to offer. Um, so I know that was a very long-winded answer, but that's my big take on, just my big saying for other people is really, we live in a beautiful world, and it is in essence a good world. So don't get down on it. Don't feel like the world's going to hell in a handbasket. It might be, but even if it does, there's still many beautiful, good things that we can still appreciate.
Yeah, maybe the fires will light the clouds up nice too. No, but I agree with. I think that's. I couldn't have said it better myself. That's a really good point, and I love the. You were talking kind of about the history bit there, and like all the people, the cultures, all the beautiful things, and stuff like that. And you put it more elegantly than I could have ever. Stuff like that's why I decided to master in anthropology, because there's so much about people, and really, like, looking at the world, like, obviously there was a time before mankind, but you know for what we're primarily concerned with, like, it's people that make all of the things we've talked about happen. And I agree. I
Completely.
think people are generally more good than they are bad. So even if the news is always, if it bleeds it reads, putting that aside, I think if you look past that, you'll generally see more good than bad. And I think even some of your examples point to that, right? Like, you were in Turkey, or Turkey, I guess now, and
Yes.
yes, yes. Uh, but when you were there, and talk about how nice the people were, some people might have a preconceived notion that wouldn't be the case, and yet, well, you prove them wrong, and the world truly is a beautiful place. So, yeah, that's
Well, I mean,
incredible.
it goes back to even within the United States. I mean, I learned this, like I said, I'm a Mississippian. And there are some states where when someone learns you're a Mississippian, it's probably the same thing with Texas. They learn you're a Texan. There's a preconceived notion. I live here in Colorado, so needless to say, there's a massive cultural difference between Colorado and Mississippi. And so, yeah, I encourage people just because don't have that preconceived notion. I think, I mean, as a Mississippian, you would hear, oh, the terrors of these, not to be political, the blue states or whatever. Most people here are really good. And I don't care if you disagree with me politically, religiously, socially. I still find many good things. Some of my best friends are people I completely disagree with. Wyatt, you and I have several things that we would probably completely disagree on. But that doesn't mean we can't really enjoy, appreciate, and pull some real good out of each other's company.
I'd say that the past hour plus have been a proof of exactly that.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So, and not to mention, there's a people aspect to it, but there's also the nature aspect as well. Like, really interesting that you mentioned the whole butterfly thing. Gosh, I guess it was Monday. Monday, I was walking back to my car from work, and I saw the first monarch butterfly of the migration that's starting.
Nice.
And I was just like, this is so cool. What? I was like, monarchs this time of year? And I looked it up. I'm like, oh, sure enough, it's probably like one of the first ones. But really funny that you bring up the spring. But I took a moment and it I was getting done with the monotony of work and stuff like that. And then I was like, oh, wait, things are actually all right. Like cool monarch butterfly. Love that.
You could call it the butterfly effect that you're still remembering, and it's becoming a part of our conversation right now,
I
huh?
know, yeah. Well, for both of us, so the double butterfly
Yeah.
effect. Yeah, it's incredible.
There you go. Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible. So, well, Sully, it's. I'm so glad that we've been able to record like one of our conversations because I feel like all of our conversations are at least at
This
this
is
level.
very tame.
Yeah,
I would argue
honestly,
this is tame.
Yeah, this is tame because we didn't talk about politics and we didn't talk about religion. Save that for another time. But
Well, there's 2 more podcasts ahead of us then, at least.
yes, at least 2, maybe double that. Who knows?
Oh.
But thank you for taking the time out of your night to join me here, even if we are. I guess we're 2 time zones away. You're in Mountain Time, and I'm over here in Eastern Time. But
Yeah, I think so.
being separated by so many miles, at least 17 and a half hours of driving. Thank you for joining me here. And if you have any last thoughts to tell the beautiful viewers of the Pai Huai To YouTube channel, if you have any last words for them, now's your chance.
Oh, well, first, Wyatt, I want to thank you so much for just letting me join, letting me share some of my simple and humble thoughts. On this podcast, I think it's unique that you're doing this to really get this perspective about just certain things in life, the most common of things that people wouldn't think about. And I guess that's my last little perspective is things like this podcast are really important. And not in that, we're not saving the world. We're not, maybe we're not thinking about the grandest of deep philosophical, theological, psychological breakthroughs. We're not making those. But sometimes it's good just to harken back to the simple thoughts and things about life, things that really make us human. And it's so important to have conversations like this where we can take an idea that's a very human idea, things we encounter every day, and then really think deeply and talk about them. Because thinking about things is one thing, but really bringing it out into conversation, we speak things into existence. And so speaking about these very human actions and ideas, it's so important. So Wyatt, I appreciate this, and I very much hope you continue this because I think what you do here is very important in getting just a better and for everyone listening to just gather this deeper and more appreciative understanding of people in general, just of mankind.
Well, thank you so much again, and I'm excited to have you back on the channel because, as we've alluded to multiple times, there's so much more that we could chat and discuss about. Hopefully, next time when we do it, it's in person, and we've got a nice glass of whiskey and a cigar.
That sounds like a good time. I will be looking forward to it, sir.
That sounds great. Thank you again, Sully. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Wyatt, and you have a good night.
Thank you. You as well.